Hi, Christine. Welcome to Venture with Grace. We're live, by the way.
Hello, thanks. I'm happy to be here.
Okay, to start the show, I would love for the audience to get to know you a little bit more. So, you started your career as a software engineer. You have worked on different startups, and then you work on your own company as well as at big companies like Facebook and Google before you started Honeycomb. Maybe we could start with like, what are some core lessons that you've learned early on in your career that kind of shape you into who you are today?
I um, Back in 2011, I was fairly new to Silicon Valley and new to San Francisco and the startup scene, and managed to grab a friend and apply to Y Combinator, and we got in
Mhm.
and found ourselves casting around for an idea. And we ended up wanting to work on an event booking marketplace because we were like,
Mhm.
oh, as individuals, we are the sort of people to, organize events for our friends. Like, this seems like a thing. And it very quickly turned out if we were hoping to build a business around this, there's a
Mhm.
whole commercial apparatus
Mhm.
that we had no idea how to break into and had no idea how complex it was.
Mhm.
We again, as outside consumers, thought we understood bits about what it meant to build a marketplace. But again, there are a lot of pieces around business incentives and the different personas and the types of relationships that are built that we had no idea about. And that, I'll say, wrapped pretty quickly.
Mhm.
And I learned it is very important to me to spend time in an area where either I know enough about the market, the people in the space, the
Mhm.
buyers, the consumers, all the individuals, or I'm willing to put in the grunt work to learn. You hear those stories about founders who got a real estate license and became real estate agents for some years before starting their startup.
Mhm.
We weren't there,
Mhm.
and I think it makes me very grateful for getting to work on Honeycomb today. I
Mhm.
think another lesson I learned from that experience, and certainly just from being in the Valley and paying attention to startup news in the early
Mhm.
2010s, uh, as a former high achiever in school, you hear things like, "Oh, it's okay to fail," and it's one thing to hear it; it's another thing to experience it.
Mhm.
But I think being in Silicon Valley and being in an environment where really people were very excitedly talking about their failures and being young in San Francisco and realizing, oh, actually I can live on a very on a very meager salary.
Mhm.
I think a lot of those things gave me the confidence to be like, okay, I don't want to do a startup again right away, but if I ever did, here are some things that would make me more confident about giving it a shot.
For sure. I love that. I feel like at the beginning when you experience that, like, I guess like it's like the humbleness because like, obviously you got into YC, which is like a great indicator that you're onto something. You're like great. You're like a very talented person. But like on the other hand, it's like testing out the wrong idea at the beginning and then being able to like live up the startup life to kind of like educate yourself on what's going to happen when you start a company is like a really core lessons that like maybe a lot of people should experience early on. And then as you mentioned about like the failure, though I don't think it's like 99% startup actually fail, so it's like a more common than uncommon. But I feel like experiencing that earlier will give you like a comfort zone that like you won't die if this happen again. So I feel like I totally hear what you're saying on like, having that experience is very crucial. What about we talk about like, since you mentioned about like the first idea on the event space was like completely no, but maybe we could talk about like, when you started Honeycomb on the second time as a founder, like what were the original inspirations? I mean, I hear about this on various different podcasts, like when you were working on Pars or working at Facebook, like you were experiencing these issues, but like those are like your firsthand issues. Maybe we could start from there. Like, how do you think about a product that like suits you personally?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you mentioned, I was working at Parse. I joined Parse at the end of 2012.
Mhm,
And my co-founder, Charity Majors, was already there. She was the infra team, eventually ran the infra team. And I joined as an application engineer.
mhm,
And the origin story of Parse really is rooted in, for anyone who isn't familiar, Parse was a mobile backend as a service. What this meant was that our pitch was, you're a mobile app developer, you don't want to have to worry about servers and data storage and login sessions. Use our
mhm,
SDKs, we'll abstract that all away for you. You can focus on what makes your app great.
mhm,
And what that meant was that we had this beautiful experience for app developers, and we took on all of the complexity
mhm,
of the madness of sort of mobile web and mobile apps, the mobile craze in the 2010s. And so because we were running a multi-tenant polyglot storage, API um, eh, system, a system where people interacted with us through APIs and SDKs, rather than very carefully through UI experiences that we could curate, we were just dealing with I'll say, a certain level of chaos constantly.
mhm,
And uh, we were always trying to figure out, right, hey, the system overall looks solid. Why are we getting these like handful of email chains every day of
mhm,
people saying that Parse was broken for them? Okay, well, that just meant that we had to go and dig in and figure out what weird combination of SDK and endpoint and their like application settings were resulting in their users being unhappy, because ultimately that's what we were trying to debug. And that initially gave us a really solid appreciation for the complexity that we were all heading towards as we added all these different independent but interacting factors
mhm,
that could impact whether it seemed like software worked or not. The challenge for the app developers and us figuring out what combination of things caused unexpected behavior
mhm,
just became harder and harder. So that was our like daily lives as engineers. We would all do rotations on support and have to figure that
mhm,
out. On top of that, I mentioned I was a developer. My co-founder was much more
mhm,
ops, and some of our very early interactions were literally, uh, I'll say, me very excitedly shipping something, and then
mhm,
Charity coming over like a few days later with her graph, being like, "What did you do? My Cassandra cluster is acting strangely," and it started happening around your deploy. And
mhm,
we would have this interaction where she'd show me her ops oriented monitoring graphs. Right? She'd be
mhm,
like, "Look at my Cassandra throughput. What did you do?" And I would sit there, an application developer, not thinking naturally in terms of write throughput for databases. I was thinking in terms of customers and endpoints and different SDK versions, the things that impacted the logic paths in my code.
mhm, mhm,
And as we started thinking about, fast forward a few years, we were eventually acquired by Facebook, and neither of us were happy there, and we're thinking about leaving. When we were thinking about what sort of problem we wanted to solve,
mhm,
part of, besides the obvious, like, yes, we wanted to help people deal with that complexity and solve problems, this translation layer between ops and dev was one that was really interesting to us,
mhm,
because it seemed like, at the time there were APM tools, logging tools, and monitoring tools.
mhm,
It seemed like all of those tools ultimately were built for the ops persona. And
mhm,
from my perspective, I was like, ops people are so cool. They have all this data. They're the ones who hold the line to make sure that stuff is actually
mhm,
working. But it was so scary for me as an application developer to
mhm,
try to map what my world looked like, test cases and
mhm,
these business logic pieces,
mhm,
to production. And we were like, uh, this this ability for the two of us,
mhm,
as cartoon versions of our representative populations,
mhm, mhm,
for the two of us to work together is so necessary for an engineering team to be high functioning, because you
mhm,
want the developers to care about what happens in production. You want the ops people to, again, use sort of outdated terms. You want the ops people to be able to go to a developer and say, hey, not just write throughput is through the roof on my Cassandra cluster, but latency is really high for our biggest customer. What did you do?
Mhm.
Like once you can get the two sides speaking each other's language, it changes how quickly you can share context and serve your customers. So I think what was fun about this problem space was not only that we lived it, but as we started thinking about starting a company, which was, felt new to me, even though I'd had my brief flirtation with the other one in 2011, it was new to Charity. Um, we had both felt like we'd been in the valley for long enough, watching other startups start up and fail, or, make the news for none of the reasons that you want to make the news,
Mhm.
that it was fun to be like, here's this thing we have so much conviction around that actually we can take a couple months in the very beginning and make sure that you and I are aligned. We can make sure the founders are doing it for the same reason, doing it for
Mhm.
the right reasons, that we spend time talking about not just the potential in the product and the potential in the business, but like, what kind of company do we want to build? For both of us, Parse had been a formative experience, not just because of the origin story of Honeycomb, but because we loved working with that team. We loved working on that problem space. We loved working, on that mission. And we were like, how do we make sure that if someone takes the risks and joins Honeycomb, that they have a high chance of having Honeycomb be that formative experience for them, whatever that means. And so I feel I feel very lucky
Mhm.
that the formative experiences leading up to starting Honeycomb
Mhm.
happened when we knew enough to know what some mistakes not to make,
Mhm.
but we didn't know so much that we would get discouraged by, oh, well, that's really hard, or we don't actually know B2B SaaS metrics very well, or we don't actually know how to do B2B sales. Like we didn't know what we didn't know. And so we were willing to just be like, okay, let's give it a shot.
Mhm. I love that. And I wonder, so like you said a couple of things that are really, I mean, I think when I was like listening to your other podcasts, like you mentioned about business logic. So like what does that entail for an engineering setting?
Yeah. So this is my an official sounding term
Mhm.
for basically the meat of the application logic, right?
Mhm.
If you're working with I'll say in parse, when I think about the business logic, it was things like, okay, if we're accepting a request on this endpoint, we
Mhm.
have to do things like make sure this is a valid account, see whether they're a paid account or not. If they're a paid account, like there's, maybe there's certain functionality that is turned on, and there's code paths that are viable based on, I don't know, who they're connected to, or what their application is provisioned for. In I'll say an e-commerce site, maybe the business logic might look things like, okay, is this user a merchant or a consumer? Are they signed in? Do they have an account history? Are there certain restrictions that we place on them? It's the stuff
Mhm.
that makes uh, the application be useful in its intended
Mhm.
use case, but contains the sort of things that are really unique to that organization. And
Mhm.
ultimately, the way that you figure out whether something matters to your business or not. Um, a thing that would happen all the time with Parse was like, again, you'd hear some resource, some database, something get thrashed by traffic. But if you
Mhm.
dug in, that traffic was from some random free app that we had never heard
Mhm.
of that just launched. And we were like, okay, they're doing something kind of abusive. We're just going to turn them
Mhm.
off.
Mhm.
That's very different from being able to go and see, oh, this app, this user having a bad experience is our biggest customer.
Mm.
That, right? And like that distinction is only going to be captured through business logic. It's going to only be captured through the sorts of things that help you map it back to what your business and company cares about. So that's what I
Mm.
mean by that term.
Got it. That's really cool. And honestly, I know that you guys invented observability. So like the first time I discovered you guys were like other younger YC companies trying to do something you guys are doing, and then they would list you as their biggest competitor, though they're like just born yesterday. But and then I keep seeing you guys popping up on those decks. So I'm like, I need to like dig into what's going on here. So that's like the first time I heard about you guys. And then I asked my friend on like, I'm not technical. So I asked my technical friends are like, can you describe observability to me? They're like, it's the same reason that you gotta know P&L for business to check on a company's health. And I thought that was like a very interesting description. And I want to start with like maybe when you were thinking about building your product and then building like a business, I guess as currently you're the CEO, at the beginning you co-founder or the CEO, like I feel that was like a really interesting switch because like I think most people just stay where they are for life. But I wonder, how do you think about from how building like a product mode and then building like a business mode?
Yeah, a lot of ground there. I think for the product mode perspective, we started at a time. The reason many people credit us for sort of defining the term observability is that when we started, no one was using that term, and everyone was talking about APM, which was application performance monitoring, which was really where companies like New Relic and Dynatrace and AppDynamics started in the
Mhm,
2010s. That were very focused in this like beautiful, magical, out of the box
mhm,
experience for what the heck is my software doing. People were talking about monitoring, which were all about dashboards and metrics, and
mhm,
this is often very skewed towards infrastructure and ops people. This is where companies like Datadog and SignalFx and Grafana had their start, really focusing on the monitoring piece. And then people were talking about logging, which for anyone who it's just capturing text strings. This is where these were the companies like Splunk and SimoLogic. This is where they
mhm,
all had their start. And it was very acceptable at this time to have maybe a logging tool and a monitoring tool that you'd jump between, or you'd have your
mhm,
APM tool and then your logs just in case.
mhm,
And that was the norm. You just had some subset of the three. Sometimes you had all
mhm,
three tools.
mhm,
And the key realization for us and why we started Honeycomb was being like, this is messed up. This is like a terrible
mhm,
experience, having to like jump
mhm,
between these different tools. And like our specific problem, which were literally, I said I started in 2012. We were acquired by Facebook in 2013. Charity and I both ended up leaving in 2015. To give you a sense of scale,
mhm,
in 2013, Parse was supporting 60,000 unique mobile apps.
mhm,
So all different sizes, all different read-write patterns, just hitting our API. By 2015, that number grew to 1 million. So at any given time, we basically had 1 million different customers who were doing very different things on the platform, where any day, any given day, any one of them could release a change to their app and start using us in a very weird way.
mhm,
And this meant that on any given Tuesday, we were debugging literally 1 in a million problems because someone would write in and be like, parse is broken. We'd be like, no, I don't think parse is broken. Let's debug it together. And those 1 in a million problems were very hard for APM monitoring or logging tools to deal with. Either it was like too granular or not granular enough. Like it was just a pain. And for what it's worth, today, looking at sort of how we architect software today and all the different factors and all the different components that can go into building a
mhm,
system, a lot of engineering teams are dealing with 1 in a million problems constantly also.
mhm,
So we knew that the default way of doing things was broken, and no one was really challenging um, the the industry standard.
mhm,
When we were bought by Facebook,
mhm,
one of the things that we were exposed to was this internal tool that like made a bunch of weird trade-offs.
mhm,
It kind of had the flexibility of a logging tool and the speed of a metrics tool, but
mhm,
uh, it often made a trade-off between accuracy and speed.
mhm,
Like be like 97% like confidence that like this is the number that you're looking for. This is the chart. But for us, that was fine. We just needed to be pointed in the right direction and be able to like iteratively explore to who is causing my system to go down.
mhm,
And we were like, holy cow, this is the experience that we want. It turned debugging, one of those 1 in a million problems, from a sometimes half-day exercise where we'd have to like go and redeploy things to
Mhm.
capture if app ID spit out this other graph.
Mhm.
Turn that from like possibly a half-day thing into 30 seconds. Literally, you're just like, okay, which app is using this endpoint? Who's using it the most? Who's causing the most errors? Oh, like there's something weird there.
Mhm.
And the reason so we were like, this is this experience that we want to build. We've never seen it anywhere else. Talking to a bunch of other Facebook engineers at the time, people would say things like, if I ever leave Facebook, I never want to be without this tool.
Mhm.
And we're like, there's a huge opportunity here that doesn't seem to exist outside of Facebook to help engineers make sense of their systems. And I
Mhm.
think what enabled, my charity and I are both engineers. We're not product people. We're not designers. But we had this like incredibly strong shared conviction and incredibly strong shared vision of how it should feel because we'd used this internal tool.
Mhm.
And it did white papers on it. So we weren't like stealing IP. We were just like, this is solving a problem in a way that we'd never seen before.
Mhm.
And we need a new word to describe it. Because gosh, if we go out to the market and try to say like a logging tool, but faster, or
Mhm.
this is a monitoring tool, but more flexible,
Mhm.
we're gonna get so many people scratching their heads, trying to like just slap us into one of the existing categories that they're familiar with. And that's going to saddle us immediately with all the baggage of these
Mhm.
existing tools that have
Mhm.
these fundamental flaws. And so, honestly, for the first like 4 years of Honeycomb, our biggest challenge was that we were just so different from anything people had used. It was weird, and this is one of those things that internal tools can get away with. Internal tools, you just have the person come by and say, "This is the tool that you use. You're going to sit through a training on how to use it. If you don't like it, I don't know, come transfer to my team and make it better."
Mhm.
But we wouldn't have that luxury. We had to figure out how to start talking about it. We had to figure out how to
Mhm.
make it feel usable enough.
Mhm.
And so in the beginning, honestly, we were not that stressed about product moat because we knew we were like this weird thing that no one had ever seen before. And
Mhm.
in several years of Honeycomb, it took us 3 years to open up a free or credit card tier because we were like, if someone comes in wandering into this product without us talking to them, they're going to be confused and run away.
Mhm.
Today, happily, the sort of model, this approach of iteratively working with your data, expecting that you can go from a monitoring chart down to log data, like that is much more common. And so a lot of these new startups, I don't know, we were cited in Dex, that's cool. A lot of these new startups can have that more about the PLG motion, um, which actually is a decent segue into you talked about business moat. Um, I think one of the things I have learned, to my moderate chagrin, is that all of these tools look, all of these tools very often use the same words to
Mhm.
describe what we do. Whether you're logging tool, APM, monitoring, observability, whatever, we're all like, make sense of your software or
Mhm.
reduce incidents or, you know, our very first like website, we were like struggling so much with the wording, we ended up diluting it down to something that was totally meaningless, like real-time data analysis.
Mhm.
Picture's not that much better. Every graph looks the same in a screenshot. Whether it's like a tool from 20 years ago versus today, like
Mhm.
ultimately what matters is what you can do with the graph, what you can do with the tool. Um, we have really built our business around getting people into the product, lowering that barrier to entry so that people can like convince themselves that we are different, that it
Mhm.
can, that, they can have the confidence that if they're looking at an aggregate graph, that they can like refine it but with something really arbitrary and then go down straight to the source data. Like that is still something that gets people excited today.
Mhm.
And, we did things like we had an open sandbox where you didn't need to put in your email address to play around with demo
Mhm.
data. You
Mm.
do it. And, looking around at our competitors at the time, people not only had gated demos, many of them you talk to a person to see the product. Like, we were like, no, we just have to make it as easy as possible for someone to see that we are different, to kick it and see what happens. And then we need to have, as quickly and smoothly as possible, get them to be willing to have a conversation with us. Because even after we'd opened up that self-serving credit card tier, we were still different. We are still different today for a lot of the customers that we're bringing on. It's a change to go from your logging, monitoring, and APM world into Honeycomb. And so part of those early conversations that we have with a prospect are basically, let's focus on your problem to try to create some distance from the solutions that you're used to. And let's talk about how new tools are introduced in your organization. Let's talk about how new processes are introduced to try to gauge how open are they to change. And that human element, both before the sale and after, to really support and drive adoption, continues to be a huge part of our business and a huge part of how we show up with our customers, that I think remains a moat in our business. The fact that we write blog posts about how all software systems are socio-technical systems. You can't remove the human, the engineering teams, from the challenge of keeping your systems reliable and available. I think many tools in this space really want to just say, buy our technology and all your problems will be solved. That's a wonderful promise, but I've lived through that from the other side, and it's really frustrating to hear those promises and know it's not true. And so we have always, I think, never lost sight of, we're here to bring engineering teams together. Technology can help by helping, by helping the data speak the same language across the engineering team. But ultimately, the exciting part is how those teams use the tools and how that ends up changing how they work.
For sure. I have a couple piggyback question like what you just said. One thing I find really interesting is it's kind of like you're talking to the engineering's language and then going through their behavior instead of making it, you hate these demos or the long, I guess just making it complicated for people to try out the product or just take a look at what's going on. And I wonder, when you're designing the sales journey to other developers, how does that kind of changes throughout the years? Because nowadays I feel there's so many open source projects. Even I'm not technical, I hear about open source all day every day, but I guess how do you think about the go to market for your product, and then how does that change in the past 9 years? And then I have a second question. I can save it for later, but I'm just gonna put it out there just because I feel it's on my mind. I will forget if I don't. I think one thing, it's the being a AI native company, what does that entail? The AI native observability tools, what does that even mean? I'm sorry, I know that you guys don't really highlight the AI part. I feel everything is AI, but anyway, so yeah, I feel that's a new thing I've been seeing. Everything is AI, so not sure what that means for actual developer.
I have thoughts. Okay. Let's start with the go-to-market motion piece, and then we'll talk about AI.
Okay.
Our go-to-market motion, like I said, in the beginning, we didn't know what we didn't know. We did know from Parse that it is really hard to build a really substantial and sustainable business off of free signups and upgrades. And at Parse, part of the, at the point of acquisition, we were, as a business, really struggling with, okay, we've got all of these customers who are free, really free users, who are sucking up all of our time, but they're talking about us and making us very popular, but we need to make money. And that was just a constant conversation at Parse, and it was a struggle. And so Charity and I came into Honeycomb being like, observability, we didn't have the word at the time. We were like, this is a big, making sure your software works is a big problem. Big problems get bigger. The bigger the company gets. Those
Mhm.
bigger companies have bigger budgets. We are an
Mhm.
enterprise sales company.
Mhm.
And again, we didn't know what that meant early on, but we knew that's where we wanted to be aligned. That we did not think that we could get off the ground initially targeting SMBs and
Mm.
credit card transactions.
Ooh.
And what that meant to us in the very early days
Mhm.
was, okay, enterprise sales means white glove. It means chair to your eye, or early on, one of our early engineers will go and like sit with a prospect
Mhm.
and help them clean up their data and help them get their data in Honeycomb and then help them learn the tool.
Mhm.
And literally our very first customer, Nihilus,
Mhm.
one of our engineers, Ben Hartshorn, just went to their office for a week and like helped them with naming conventions on their data
Mhm.
and helped them like tidy up some of the stuff they'd built up over the years.
Mhm.
And we were like, okay, this is what this feels like. Fast forward a year or so, and we were continuing to try to do this. And we would be on these sales calls where, we'd be explaining the vision, explaining how we could help, and, after hearing their problems, and there'd
Mhm.
come this point and the prospect would say, okay, what do we do next? How do we get started?
Mhm.
And we would come back and say, how do you want to get started?
Mhm.
Because for us, like, oh, we're like, that's white glove. It's whatever you want. We will support.
Mhm.
And it took, I'll just say, about a year of conversations like that, kind of like, you know, fizzling out
Mhm.
before we realized, oh, if we're positioning ourselves as the experts, gosh, we should show up like we have a prescribed path for them to go down. And then the
Mhm.
white glove shows up in like how we can customize that path, but we should like have this is step one is what we suggest, then
Mhm.
step two, then step three, and like,
Like a processes or something.
yeah.
Yeah.
Which again, for your listeners who have ever thought about go to market in a B2B setting, they're all sitting there going like, duh. But this was something that was new to us, and it
Mhm.
was a shift for us as engineers who. It's funny, I started this podcast talking about, like, knowing what you're doing, or knowing what you're talking about. We never bought software, and so early on, we were like, obviously, our buyers will wanna speak to technical people, and they'll want to spend as little time talking and as much time, like, doing technical stuff as possible. And that probably, if it was as we go forward in time, also was something that we really started to try to shift, because what we learned was, if again, all the go-to-market folks in your audience are continuing to roll their eyes, but if you only have credibility with the very technical people,
Mhm.
you only stay in the technical weeds
Mhm.
for the majority of the sales process,
Mhm.
your champion is going to have so much trouble justifying to their boss or their boss's boss or whoever holds the budget that this
Mhm.
is something worth investing in. Um, and and so the journey of learning how to ask about why
Mhm.
these types of tools matter to the business, why it matters that your system is down, right? From a technical point of view, it's obvious. Oh, it matters when the system is down because the system can't go down because that's our job.
Mhm.
But being able to help our champions learn how to answer the question of, okay, well, why does it matter? Well, because when our system goes down, we can't process, we're eBay, we can't process eBay transactions.
Mhm.
That's money. Like, being able to connect that was a muscle that we had to learn and then had to often teach our champions. Um, One of the things also that we have, that we've sort of gone back and forth with. I mentioned in about year 3, we introduced our free and credit card tier. And for a while, we saw ourselves as a business. I had a previous marketing leader who described it as the go-to-market sandwich. She was like, we've got this self-served part of our business. We've got the sales-led part of our business. They serve each other, but they're of equal importance in the business.
Mhm.
And again, I think in the run up to 2021, and where everyone had cash and everyone, like, all these new startups were willing to go play with new tools, that might have been more true.
Mhm.
And a thing that we we now believe about
Mhm.
this space is that because is my software working? And if not, why? Is a big problem for companies. It's also rarely a problem that a small group of people can make a decision about, which is sort of a hallmark of the sort of very famous PLG businesses, right? Dropbox, famously, lots of individual decisions, and then it's pulled together into a corporate decision. Twilio, Stripe, these are pretty contained problems where maybe one team is responsible for payments or integrating telephony. Not so for observability. For these sorts of problems, inevitably, even if it was a manager or senior manager who's really excited about Honeycomb, they had to convince their director. They had to figure out how to make a platform-wide decision. And so one of the mantras that actually marketing leader ended up leaving us with was individuals try, but teams buy. And since then, that has shaped how we think about that self-serve tier and our sales-led tier. We're never getting rid of our self-serve tier. We, like I said, we want people to play with the product. We want people to feel how it is different than every other tool that does graphs and a screenshot. But we know that an engineer playing with it on the weekend, which is very common in open source, has many more steps between that and purchase. And so we have the self-serve shares that individuals can try, but we have focused the majority of our go-to-market motion energy around engaging with teams who have initiatives to change out their observability tools, to up-level how their teams respond to incidents or think about production software. And I think it is an interesting, it continues to be interesting to look at many of the companies in this space because companies span the gamut. Or they're all across the spectrum. There are absolutely companies who are, growing, serving those SMB businesses. There are absolutely companies that are growing and thriving, serving the enterprise. And ultimately, I think it comes down to how people use the product, how you want to build the company to serve that market segment.
Totally.
That is a believe it or not, very fast rundown of the evolution of our go-to-market motion. But you asked about AI, and it's actually fun to sort of think about the zero interest rate period and how free cash was and what impact that had on SMB businesses in the context of AI again, because it feels like we're in another era where there's so many new companies who are looking for best in class and new tools, many of which are calling themselves AI native. I think AI native is an interesting term because I think it actually means something different than cloud native did. When I think of cloud native, I think of bringing in a set of technologies or building on top of a set of technologies that didn't necessarily change the customer experience, but pretty dramatically changed the engineering experience of building with and supporting and deploying and releasing changes to those customers or those end users. Whereas I feel like today, when people talk about AI native, it's much more, the impact shows up much more in the sort of experience that you're trying to build for users, what sort of expectations they have of how you as a product are going to show up to solve their problems. And it also reflects internal operations of the company. And there's almost no overlap between the things that make a company AI native and the things that make a company cloud native, besides obviously AI native companies use AI technologies. And you had another part of that question you had another part to the AI native question that I'm forgetting.
Yeah. So let's say if people are saying it's AI native observability tool, what does that even mean? I'm sure you already use AI to a lot of the things that you are currently building or already have at Honeycomb, but, like, when people add AI native to observability, like, is this a thing or what's the vibe?
I think first overall, I will say I am generally skeptical of uh, very exciting buzzwords that make people tempted to just slap it on to like seem like part of the cool kids.
Mhm,
I'm going to set that aside and try to answer your question in earnest. I think when I imagine
mhm,
that if someone is describing themselves as an AI native observability tool,
mhm,
it means that they've built the tool from the beginning
mhm,
to expect that AI will be a part of the core experience of using that tool.
mhm,
And I'll define the core experience as, um, you know, pulling data to try to answer questions about your system.
mhm,
And I think that there's a lot of reasons that that is common or popular. It's because
mhm,
as consumers, we've all gotten used to asking ChatGPT for answers to our questions.
mhm,
And so there's what feels like a pretty natural transference of or transfer of mode, that interaction mode
mhm,
to operational and telemetry data to answer
mhm,
questions about your software.
mhm,
Um, and I think that yeah, I don't know if you asked my opinion about it, but I'm going to share it anyway because you unwisely gave me the mic. I think, well, our point of view, we are obviously not an AI native observability company. We're an observability company that existed before
mhm,
for AI.
mhm,
And I am, I would, I would be a little bit skeptical of um, companies. It almost feels like they skip a step when they say,
mhm,
"Look, we're going to AIs help you answer your questions."
mhm,
And maybe it's because I came of age in my software career, sort of in the heyday of APMs that sort of promised the same thing. That promised we as a software vendor are going to answer questions about your software that you, the engineer that wrote it, don't know to ask.
mhm,
And I think that's a very big claim for a vendor. Even today, a vendor augmented through AI,
mhm,
because there's always going to be context that a human has in their brain that isn't adequately captured in the signals that an AI has access to.
mhm,
Right? So much of the conversation around AI is like starts with quality data.
mhm,
How many engineers, how many software systems who want to reach for an AI native tool have everything really well documented, have assumptions explicitly stated, have oh, under these conditions, this function will do this weird thing. Like
mhm,
those are things that maybe we collectively are getting better at explicitly telling our tools,
mhm,
but we're not quite there today. And the problem with very, very well, again, I will speak to this more through a historical lens that and like the biases that make me a little bit dubious of just AI native observability is that when companies in this space have really leaned into that magical "we'll solve these problems for you" approach in the past, it has real human consequences downstream.
mhm,
Tools like Honeycomb
mhm,
often provide the signals to determine whether
mhm,
someone gets paged in the middle of the night.
mhm,
And when the outcome of some decision in the software
mhm,
in a vendor is someone gets woken up,
mhm,
false positives aren't good. You burn out the end users,
mhm,
and false negatives aren't good.
mhm,
Meaning, if there actually is a problem and you don't alert, then like they've lost confidence in you anyway. And I think that AI LLMs and AI tools have gotten very good today.
mhm,
Um, but there's a very careful application of AI that needs to be considered when, to not to allow for the sort of hallucinations or inaccuracies or guesses that AI technologies are still making. They're not all right all the time still. So allowing for those guesses without risking the human consequences down the road.
Mm. I have a question. What is LLM observability platform? Is that just observability platform? And then when they add open source, uh, what does that entail? Like, for like observability perspective.
Yeah, I'll answer those questions in reverse. The open source one is easier. Open source really just means usually that the vendor is building sort of
In public, yeah, like
building in public. Yeah,
yeah,
so people can see and they can
yeah.
contribute. It's a very cool way to build software. So
Right. I mean,
I think
like, in terms of, like, observability, let's say open source LLM observability
if you're
platform.
an open source observability tool, it means the same thing as if you're an open source, telephony management tool. It just means it's a
Open
characteristic of
source.
your software, not the vertical.
Mhm,
Um, it's fine. And what I think a reason you probably hear it a lot in the observability space is that there are quite a few well-known tools
mhm,
that are open source in this general space, and so they are
mhm,
aligning themselves with those well-known brands. Um, your question about LLM observability, I think again collectively as an industry, maybe because we are all engineers building for engineers, we're like bad at words and just like use the same words for everything. I think it can mean one of two things. One of the two things is slightly more accurate. The other one is a little bit sloppy. Um, I think the one that's a little more accurate is people using LLM observability to describe, uh, again, solving this core problem of like, what is the software doing, but focused around what your LLMs are doing. And, or, maybe these are for people who are training their own models or building their own pipelines, or have certain workflows
mhm,
built on top of LLMs that they're really trying to understand. There are some specialized tools that in some cases were like built for data pipelines that transfer very well to LLM workflows,
mhm,
where they say, data observability or LLM observability to indicate that they're specialized around this kind of software
mhm,
workflow. Um, the sloppier version, I think, is when people are like, LLM observability means you can access your observability through an LLM interface or a chat interface.
mhm.
Um, I think that is confusing for the first group of people,
Mhm.
but I wouldn't be surprised if that's what some people meant.
Got it. And then at the very beginning, you were mentioning about, like, in terms of the ideal client, you want to serve like the bigger enterprise, right? And then but when you started a startup, I feel like Nihilus is I feel like right now it's a very popular company. I don't know when you started working with them, maybe they're like in a more earlier stage as well. Um, how do you think about finding the first batch of people that you want to work with, and then, like, how much do you upcharge when you rising through, to like serve the bigger clients? And
Yeah.
then, like, are they the same product offering? I'm sure it's a different set of product offering, but like, how do you think about the sales journey? Maybe in the past you sell to like two engineer, now you're selling to the CTO of like a Fortune 500.
Yeah. This is a great question because it was one that I angsted about a lot early on. And again, we didn't know. First, I'll say, again, I'll kind of answer your questions in reverse order.
Mhm,
Nihilus was our first customer. They get to benefit from our current products today, which has
mhm,
all the bells and whistles, and it's great.
mhm,
The benefit of getting in early as a SaaS customer is you get to influence and benefit from all the improvements that happen downstream.
mhm,
I also generally try to believe in being grateful to those early customers. And so I
mhm,
certainly hope Nihilus folks, if you're listening, you don't feel like
mhm,
you've been subject to too many price hikes. I think that we are much more, uh, the way that we price and the way that we structure contracts.
mhm,
Nihilus has been with us since the end of that first year. And
mhm,
so if you've been with us for 8 years, we can we can be a little more flexible on pricing.
mhm,
Your first question, though, was about how to find those first set of people to work with. And we, today we have logos on our landing page like
mhm,
Slack and Vanguard and
mhm,
probably Stripe. And like these are very well-known brands and very
mhm,
established engineering organizations that were very much not our first customers.
mhm,
And I I think that when you're first starting out, really it's like who can you get to take a chance on you and who can you build a relationship with where they'll give you really good feedback
Mhm.
of the sort that you're looking for. Nihilus was still pretty early in their journey also, and so, their office was like a few blocks away from ours. And what we found, sort of to zoom out a little bit, in that
Mhm.
first set of people that we were able to bring on board, we were still learning how to talk about observability. We were still learning how to talk about how we were different from APM logging and monitoring.
Mhm.
And so we, for better or for worse, we were able to lean on the people that we'd like known in the tech industry for years, who had, like us, tried all of the tools and been frustrated.
Mhm.
And we noticed that, again, like when I think about those early customers, the conversation often started with like, how everything sucks? And like,
Mhm.
not actually that flip, but like, how it's, when you're running a platform, it's really hard to solve the like those one customer problems, or the like, which customers is causing a problem, or which customers are impacted by this change. Like these granular, very specific problems. How
Mhm.
that's really hard with existing tools? And they would say
Mhm.
yes. And we're able to have that entry point because we are able to look at their business and like understand what is hard from an engineering point of view about it.
Mhm.
And then we're able to be like, you have been around for long enough. You know the challenges with all the other approaches. So we're not going to have to try to convince you that the tool that you're using has
Mhm.
problems.
Mhm.
You know what those problems are. You just hadn't seen the solution yet. And now we can show you how we're making a set of changes, or we're making a set of trade-offs that is really interesting. About a year and a half in, we started we really started to notice um, this one phrase was really striking a nerve with people, and it was something that we could actually put on our marketing page, and people would come to us. And it
Mhm.
was a phrase. It's a term, high cardinality.
Mhm.
We talk about high cardinality data, and how we supported it. And what it means is, uh, cardinality is like a mathematical attribute term that we don't
Mhm.
have on our website anymore for reasons you can imagine.
Mhm.
But it's a mathematical property that basically says there's a lot of possible options in
Mhm.
a given set. So an example for, let's use an e-commerce website.
Mhm.
Um, you know, you can imagine trying to describe the inventory of Target.com
Mhm.
in like a spreadsheet, and maybe one of the columns is it on sale or not?
Mhm.
And for that column, there's two possible values. Yes, it's on sale, or no, it's not on sale. That is not a high cardinality field, or not high cardinality data, because there's only two possible values there.
Mhm.
But then there might be a different column for price, where there's basically an infinite number of, Target doesn't sell anything over,
Mhm.
very expensive items. But in theory, there's like an infinite number of possible prices. There's an infinite number of possible product names. There's a nearly infinite number, probably an infinite number of possible product SKUs. Each of those are
Mhm.
high cardinality fields. And if you think back to that question you asked earlier about business logic, all of those are critical for debugging business logic.
Mhm.
Why was this on sale product sold for its full price?
Mhm.
These are the sorts of things that you need to go into your code and debug. And you need all of the high cardinality fields available in your data to go debug that.
Mhm.
And after the first set of customers that we got from people that we knew, and people who were just like, I hate my current tools, you're promising something better,
Mhm.
cool, give it a shot. Dramatically oversimplifying it, but the sort of the next set of people that came to us because they heard about us, because Charity was going around talking about how monitoring was dead and observability
Mhm.
was a new thing. Those people came to our website, saw, we help with your high cardinality data problems, and they went, oh, light bulb, I
Mhm.
have that problem. Intercom is also one of our early customers. Intercom, for anyone who isn't familiar, it's a B2B SaaS it's like an intercom for your site. It allows people, I think they, uh, you know, allow you to have conversations with the users on your website. And like Parse, like Nihilus, they had platform problems
Mhm.
because all of their customers had different apps. Each app could have 0 to God knows how many users on the other side.
Mhm.
They were all doing different things, and so they needed to be able to isolate, and they were like, "That is a high cardinality data problem that we've struggled with in our existing vendors." And so finding those initial wedges to illustrate, "Oh, we're like monitoring, but more flexible. Oh, we're like logging, but faster." And finding that term and finding that entry point is what allowed us to start collecting, attracting those customers
Mhm.
and building that flywheel of feedback and building value and being able to reach more customers.
Mm. I think that's really interesting. You mentioned about like, first of all, like finding out the pain point and then finding the customer that's with the high cardinality
Yeah, there you go.
like problem. I mean, I learned a new word. So like, yeah, basically finding the customer that actually will encounter this type of problem like repetitively or like more heavily than, the yes or no problem people. So I guess like when you were selling to Vanguard versus you were selling to Nihilus, what was like the different sales journey? So like assuming selling to like a Vanguard, that's like I would say probably very hard because it's like finance related and it's sensitive and everything. Maybe that will be our last like real question, and then I want to be mindful of your time. But yeah.
Yeah, I think yes, the sales journeys were very different, and also,
Mhm,
we in both cases we started with engineering leaders.
mhm,
In the Nihilus case, we started with like the CTO because it was a 10-person company. With Vanguard, we started with I think an engineering director, I want to say.
mhm,
Um, but in the Vanguard case, they had a
mhm,
pain. They were This was 2019, so they were really struggling. There was a period when a bunch of the banks were moving online, and Vanguard had some very public outages, and
mhm,
they came to us and they're like, we can't have that happen again.
mhm,
Um, and so there were really some elements that stayed the same of like, look, let's focus on, and we were able to bring in all the lessons that we learned.
mhm,
Let's focus on the pain that we're feeling. We're going to uh, suggest a path forward. You're going to want to You, Vanguard, will want to apply your constraints to it. We'll focus our efforts, make sure that you put in a little bit of effort, get a little bit of value, put in a
mhm,
little bit more effort, get a little more value. And uh, in sort of following that pattern, be able to continually demonstrate more and more value to ultimately the economic buyers.
mhm,
And it was much more of what our sales process looks like today in connecting to value, being very mindful about the amount of effort, showing up like we know what we're doing instead of just saying we're going to send an engineer to your office and he'll solve your problems. I'm thinking about Ben.
mhm,
Um, but it is definitely, I think we really, really would have struggled if we said from the start, we're going to go after the vanguards.
mhm.
We needed to understand what our motion looked like so that we could show up to a vanguard ready.
Mm, totally. Love that. Okay, so I wanna end with a quick one minute fire round for you.
Okay.
Um, what's your favorite book?
Uh, God. Um, I've been thinking a lot recently about a book called Permutation City. It's written in 1984, and it feels
Mm,
very still relevant to AI and what does intelligence mean versus what does artificial intelligence mean when you simulate intelligence versus provide the building blocks for intelligence to sort of come uh, demonstrate emergent behavior.
mm.
Not my favorite book, but the only one I can think of, or the one that pops in mind right now.
So interesting. How do you find these books? That's not very groupthink. This is not like a groupthink book.
That one was pulled off a friend's shelf.
Oh,
Um, a slightly more groupthink book, maybe, I don't know. A book called Children of Time. I read a lot of science fiction
mm,
by Adrian Tchaikovsky, published a few years ago. Also, it's a space opera that plays with different it's in like alien thinking and alien brains, and it's just a lot of fun.
mm. Who made the biggest impact in your career?
I mean, I think I have to say my co-founder Charity. She
Mhm.
and I have grown up a lot together.
Love. Who would you invite to your dinner party?
Oh, uh, I'll say one of the Stripe founders, just because I have to say something, and I'm going to think too much about this.
Where can we find you outside of work?
I live just outside Reno. I walk the dogs a lot, and so hopefully taking my dogs for a walk in the mountains.
Why
Possibly listening to an
Reno?
audiobook.
Can I say why Reno? Perhaps?
I have the 2 happiest dogs in the world. It's a pretty good reason for me. Also, it's close enough to San Francisco that I can come back whenever I need. But I was in San Francisco for 12 years. It was
It's too
time to take a
much.
break.
I feel
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
Want to quickly say hi to the audience. Hi, Peter, for engaging with us, and then hi, LinkedIn user. I mean, we have more audience, but like it's just like the audience who comment. I want to give them a shout out.
Cool.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Christine, for coming on the show. It was such a master class for observability and selling a dev tool.
Yeah. Thanks. It's fun to get a chance to talk about these. Your lightning questions are not lightweight questions that are easy to answer.
Oh, okay. I don't know. Like,
this
what's
is
your
fun.
favorite movie? I don't know if that's a good question, but anyway.
Thanks so much for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you. Let me quickly add